Let me introduce Marianne. Marianne's been a member of CCL since 2013 when she joined the Mount Pleasant chapter, soon after retiring from her career as a professor of communication. She's currently serving as co-chair of the Kalamazoo chapter of CCL and as the state coordinator of liaisons to Michigan members of Congress, which currently involves serving as the liaison to Representatives John James and Representative Elisa Slotkin. She's also been involved with KCCC since its founding in 2019.
My guess is that many people who join these meetings of Fridays for Future are familiar with Citizens Climate Lobby. Some of them tend to be members, but my hope is that I can provide everyone, perhaps even those who are members of CCL, with some information that is new to them. And I'm going to do that by focusing on the structure of CCL, its purpose and niche, the resources it provides, and its approach to lobbying. It might be interesting and surprising to some that when I use the term Citizens Climate Lobby, I'm actually referring to three different groups. I'm actually referring to the group that is largest, Citizens Climate Education, which is a 501c3 organization with a budget of about $4.75 million this year. It uses that money to provide volunteer training, education and support, marketing materials and informational campaigns, and physical offices in San Diego, California. With a budget about a fifth of the size of CCE is its sister organization, Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a 501c4 entity. It funds all the lobbying and related spending, and so it covers events, including conferences such as the one in June that's held in Washington, D.C., and prepares attendees to lobby on Capitol Hill. It funds the physical offices in Washington, D.C., and the salary costs associated with lobbying. CCL and CCE were both formed in 2007 with a chapter in San Diego, California. Growth expanded then across the country and then around the world. So in 2021, the third group, Citizens Climate International, was founded. There are now chapters in CCI in 76 countries on 6 continents, everywhere from A to Z, so from Australia to Zimbabwe. And for CCE in its entirety, there are a total now of 529 chapters. It doesn't cost anything to join CCL, but its members see it as a very valuable organization, and that explains why over the last 2 years, approximately 95% of the organization's funding have come from individual donations, and often those individuals are members of Citizens Climate Lobby. Foundations provided another 2% of the overall funds, and the conference revenue provides the final 3%. CCI, CCL, and CCE manage their funds wisely, and that's why it has received recognition as a sound financial manager as a nonprofit from these 3 organizations. Charity Navigator, which has given it a 4-star rating, that's the highest rating possible. A Candid Platinum Seal of Transparency, again, the highest ranking possible, and it's regarded as a 2023 top-rated nonprofit award, which was given from the group called Great Nonprofits. Now that you know something about the organization itself, it's time to talk about the purpose of CCL. And the motto of CCL embodies that purpose: building political will for a livable world. Now, clearly, there are 2 different elements involved in that. The first is that we're building political will. We do that in order to maintain and repair our democracy. And as CCL's national website says, CCL enables individual breakthroughs in the exercise of personal and political power. CCL focuses on what we call the 5 levers of political will to build personal power. And those are lobbying Congress, providing information to the public through media relations, both radio, television, and then print media, particularly through writing of op-eds and letters to the editor. We do grassroots outreach or engagement, and that comes from presentations such as this or presentations to other groups, comes from tabling. Grass tops engagement, where we meet with leaders in the community, both political leaders and business leaders. And we also work on group development and organizing. Chapters, CCL is organized by chapters. Those are the groups that are developed, and the chapters run independently so that you can look at the way the Kalamazoo chapter runs. I hope you will by attending tomorrow's meeting of our chapter. We have in our chapter on the mailing list over 1,000 names of people. It would be hard pressed to seat all 1,000 if they came to a meeting, but that would be an interesting challenge to deal with. The other goal, besides building political will, is creating the livable world. And to create a livable world, CCL has a broad policy agenda. We work on policies that are effective in reducing net emissions and in building bridges, both in Congress and in our communities. More specifically, CCL has a four-pronged policy agenda. From the beginning, CCL has focused on a carbon fee and dividend and have lobbied in Congress to have such legislation introduced. It was exciting when this is now the third Congress in which the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act has been introduced, but it was very exciting the very first time when it was introduced with 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats as co-sponsors. We've been talking about that legislation since its beginning, as I said, which was 2007. So now a lot of congressional offices have heard of that legislation, and some are not likely to jump on the bandwagon right away. In some cases, there are organizations throughout the environmental world that we'd love to be affiliated with as well. And so we added in January of last year 3 additional elements to the policy agenda: building and maintaining healthy forests, both internationally and here. So urban forests, rural forests, forests around the world. We're focused also on the electrification and energy efficiency of buildings. And then the final and 4th policy agenda item is clean energy permitting reform, building the infrastructure or increasing the speed of the permitting process, which will require reform of that process so that clean energy infrastructure can be developed to move the energy from where it's produced, which is often in rural areas, to where it's needed, which is often in urban areas. Now, you know something about what our policy agenda is and what our purpose is, but when I asked Google how many environmental organizations address climate change, Google's answer took me to the US Climate Action Network, which described itself as a vital network for over 160 organizations active on climate change. And that raises the question, I would imagine, how does CCL compare with some of those other 160 organizations? What is the niche that it fills? And thinking about the niche is interesting. As other organizations developed a lot of media attention, I think there was some sense of jealousy and maybe concern among some CCL members about what we were doing in comparison with some other organizations. And at that time, the vice president of governmental affairs, Danny Richter, is a man who got his PhD in oceanography from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in California. And he talked about the notion of a niche in terms of the underwater world, but it's a concept that is applied to in ecosystems of all sorts. CCL's niche in the environmental group ecosystem is defined by its focus on climate change, and other environmental groups, many other environmental groups, focus on a broader range of topics than just climate change. We're usually focused on legislative solutions to climate change, primarily at the federal level. It's also defined by its commitment to the core values that define it. And some of those core values have already been mentioned, such as the focus on climate change, and the development and execution of personal power. In addition to that, there's some particularly relevant core values. We operate with optimism, and that's a difficult value to uphold sometimes when you deal with climate events that make you pessimistic about how quickly we're operating to deal with climate concerns and climate catastrophes. But we do operate with optimism that working together, we can make a difference in addressing the climate change crisis that we face. We also foster diversity, making sure that everybody, or hoping to make sure that everybody feels welcomed at our meetings and in our efforts. We commit to building relationships. That is a centerpiece of CCL's operation. As its executive director has often mentioned, we're betting the farm on relationships. And we take a nonpartisan approach. That's also difficult, especially in these times when partisan divides are so obvious. In fact, there's a very interesting conversation going on among group leaders about what it means to be nonpartisan. In an era when it's easy to finger point and suggest that there are people, politicians, parties that are not concerned about climate issues, and people are entering into that conversation, mentioning how critical it is to stay nonpartisan in our approach, to make sure that we're building a relationship with whatever office, with every office in government. With some understanding then of the purpose and the niche that CCL operates within, I'd like to go to the third element of this talk and talk about the resources that CCL offers. And I'd encourage you on your own to look at this site, CCL's webpage. And I'm going to stop sharing this screen for a while and go to that screen. Okay, you'll notice that at its top, it has some general information about CCL, its core values, the story of Marshall Saunders, its founder, a description of what we do, our accomplishments, the levers of political will that I've talked about. It's also got the core values. I already mentioned that, I guess. It describes the policy elements. There's a take action screen, which we'll get to later. What I'm going to do, though, is click on take action and go down to CCL community, which I think you may need to join, and you'll notice that you can click on join as well. It always takes my laptop a while to get to community, but you see that it's welcoming me here. It tells you what my groups are. It provides an action tracker. But what I'm going to do is to click on connect, because that takes us to a very interesting place, the action teams. And it was difficult for me to provide this information anyway, but by showing you this screen. So what I'd like to show you is that you can join Citizens Climate Lobby as an overall group and then become a member of any one of these groups. So suppose, for instance, that you are somebody who's interested, who considers yourself a nerd. Well, you can join the Nerd Corner. If your primary focus is on wildlife, you can join the Wildlife Action Team. If faith is a factor in defining your identity, look at all of the faith groups that have action teams. If you're a Unitarian Universalist, for example, or a Buddhist, you can join an action team. One of the members of the Kalamazoo Climate Crisis Coalition is a former owner of an outdoor sports sporting store, so the outdoor industry would be interesting to him. You can join these because they they connect with your self-definition, but in some cases you can also use them as resources. For example, I have used the Nuclear Energy Action Team, a leader of which is a retired nuclear scientist, and he even joined the most recent lobby meeting with Representative Huizinga's office because Representative Huizinga is interested in nuclear energy. I noticed in looking through this information that the conservative outreach team has statements from conservatives, and I intend to use those in writing a letter to the editor. Remember the media relations for the St. Joseph Herald Palladium, in which I'll talk about the fact that Representative Wahlberg has recently assumed the chair position in the Conservative Climate Caucus. And the outgoing chair, John Curtis of Utah, says some very important things about the importance of climate for conservatives that I think I can use in that letter to the editor. Now, there is a writer's circle where people will meet and work on writing letters to the editor. That doesn't work for me. I don't write well when I'm surrounded by other people. I need to do that on my own, and I'm pretty slow at writing. So there are all sorts of opportunities to connect with other people by using that resource. Now I'm going to go back to the other screen. One of the things you can find on that site are the monthly speakers. And you can see who's a live speaker. So tomorrow at the meeting, Sarah Ayasu will be the speaker talking about youth action programs. Jessalyn, you might find that particularly interesting. We have heard from Nathaniel Stinnett the first time we heard about the Environmental Voters Project and we learned the fact that there are lots and lots of people who identify as environmentalists, but are not regular voters. And by inspiring them to vote and developing a pattern of voting, we can encourage that voice to be heard in elections. And we continue to work with the Environmental Voter Project. It was as a monthly speaker that we first learned about the En-ROADS program. And this venue, the Fridays for Future, has already had a presentation on En-ROADS that Deb Fryman, who's recently joined the meeting, presented. We've heard often from Katharine Hayhoe, a Christian evangelical churchgoer and a climate scientist. And it is she who inspired CCL's focus on developing climate conversations, because she says that the most important thing you can do to address climate change is to talk about it. I've heard a number of other speakers who have been interesting to me. One of my favorites was the person who works with a group called the Ray, who talked about how trucks will be able to charge themselves, electric trucks will be able to charge themselves simply by driving over a highway. I thought that was really interesting information, and I sent it to one of the people for whom I was a liaison. So there are a number of important speakers, and you can listen to the archived records of those speeches. I mentioned the Take Action site, and you probably saw that lever on the CCL's website. This is the current one. Tell Congress that new research shows we need a carbon price. And that's something that you can go to quickly, log your action. Well, actually, if you take this action on the website, it is logged automatically, and that information is helpful. You know, I said that only 2% of the funding of CCE comes from grants from foundations. But that sort of information, that there are thousands of people who are taking action. There are thousands of messages being sent to Congress is important in getting grants from groups. There's a section on the website also under all resources. I mean, you can click on resources and tools and then click on resources and then on all resources, and it provides all sorts of information. So one of the things that is there is the 6 Americas, which we've used in tabling. We have not used this in tabling, but a number of groups have, and maybe we'd want to in the future, based on Lucy in the Peanuts cartoon, a climate anxiety counseling booth, and then tips on what to say to people who come and express their climate anxiety. So we've talked about the structure of CCL. We've talked about the purpose and the niche it fills. We've talked about the resources it provides, which people who aren't members of CCL can also use. And I think that's generosity from CCL. I want to finish the final portion of the presentation by talking about the lobbying process, CCL style. And this is a picture of our lobby team several years ago now, pre-COVID. And some of these people are still members of our group. Some are busy with other factors, but this is a process that CCL uses, but other groups can use in lobbying locally, at the state level, in any variety of ways. So I'm going to talk about the steps to lobbying, and it starts with the liaison. Nikki mentioned that my role now, and it has been now for a couple of years, is as the state coordinator for liaisons. So this is something that's very much on my mind. It's one of the things that I'm responsible for is making sure that every congressional district, all 13 in Michigan, and both of the senators have liaisons. And just this morning, about an hour ago, 45 minutes ago, something like that, I got a call from the liaison in Michigan's 13th district who agreed that he will do the appointment setting, but he thinks maybe we should find somebody to replace him because he's not been as active as he should be. And right now, because there are missing liaisons in the Lansing area, the liaison last year studied abroad in France this year, and I learned that when I called him to see if he was setting up the meeting in November, and he told me how much my call was costing him in France. So I'm serving as the liaison to Alyssa Slotkin in the Lansing area, and also there was such difficulty getting a meeting with one of the districts in the Detroit area that I'm also serving as the liaison for John James. And I will until there is somebody available who's willing to be the liaison. The liaison's important because that's a person who sets up the meeting with Congress. And it's important to learn, I've learned, that polite persistence is critical in getting a meeting. Sometimes those meetings are set very easily, and sometimes it takes multiple requests. I've learned how to be skillful in developing email subject lines, writing a subject line such as, does 2 o'clock work for you? So that the person can easily respond yes or no, instead of having to read any further. Because I've learned that the congressional staff members really are very busy and often have very limited time to respond to messages. The liaison also is responsible for developing a lobby plan, and the lobby plans that CCL uses always include at the beginning an appreciation. It can be related to climate change. It doesn't have to be. So I often tell the story that one time we had an 8-year-old girl on our lobby team. She had just been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and the member of Congress in the district we were lobbying in had asked for lower costs or sponsored legislation to lower the costs of insulin. So that appreciation was very appropriate for her and for that meeting. The lobby plan always includes asks. We're going to be learning in the next 2 weeks what we will be asking Congress for in Washington, D.C. on June 11th when we lobby on Capitol Hill. Often the plan will include a climate story. particularly if a young person is involved in a lobby team. I think that the story, why they are concerned about climate change and their fear for their future, is an appropriate element to include in the lobby meeting. We work on developing open-ended questions because we want to learn as much as we can from the office about what they're thinking, what their priorities are, what their arguments for or against particular policies are. And we also include a follow-up in the lobby plan. The liaison forms or discovers a lobby team. If we're meeting virtually, we can form the lobby team and we can include experts. We can invite experts to go to Washington, D.C., but what's most important there is that we have constituents on the team, and that is not always the case. In June, though, we're going to have a number of constituents from the 4th Congressional District meeting with Representative Huizenga's office. The liaison also helps prepare the team for the meeting, and this is a picture of a lobby team from several years ago. We were practicing, and you see that rehearsing is one thing that you can do. We were rehearsing a meeting while we ate dinner the day before we did lobbying. And the person at the end in the purple shirt, Nancy Berg from Holland, role-played the aide with whom we were going to be meeting, whom I had described as pretty grumpy sometimes. So she did that in her rehearsal. She played a very grumpy aide. And lo and behold, the next day, the aide was really cheerful. So all of that preparation may have gone for naught, but I think it was good to have prepared to have a grumpy meeting anyway. The liaison also prepares the target, the congressional aide or the congressperson for the meeting by emailing the team members' names and sometimes some background about them, and attaching any relevant documents, the requests, the legislation we're asking for support for, to that to the email a day or so before the meeting. Finally, during the meeting, or not finally, but during the meeting, the liaison or the group leader, the leader of the team, helps the group to focus on building a positive relationship. The appreciation helps that. Listening as much as speaking helps build a good relationship because we get to know more about the office. Providing information helps us to become trusted messengers to Congress. We are respectful of the time that the person has. Often the meetings are quite short. I have had in district lobby meetings that have lasted as long as an hour, but on Capitol Hill, they're often as short as 15 or 20 minutes, sometimes as long as half an hour, but seldom longer than that. And we ask how much time we have at the beginning of the meeting. We pay attention to how much time has elapsed so that we can make sure that we are respectful of the time of the office. And somebody during the meeting always keeps a record. It remains confidential, so we don't rush out and tell the newspapers what we just heard from the office that we met with. That remains confidential, but it's important in planning future meetings. And the final steps in lobbying occur after the meeting when we thank the office for the meeting and we follow up. After all, it's all about the relationship that we're trying to develop. But it's also about being effective. And so I want also to show you some indication of how effective CCL is. So I'm going to stop sharing that screen and share this screen where you will hear a presentation from 2 years ago in June at the national conference.
I love Citizen Climate Lobby. You guys are the best. There is no better environmental group. No group in the environmental community has been more determined to get after things like carbon pricing that will get the emissions down. We would not be in this position if you hadn't got on the phones and come to Washington and called and emailed and done all the work that you did to put life and energy into carbon pricing and carbon border adjustment. You did that. Go out, work hard, keep pushing. We are not there yet, but it is within reach. And the reason it is within reach is because of work you have already done. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
All right, Senator Whitehouse, I think, is a climate champion in Congress. And to have that kind of validation from him suggests how useful CCL has been. And if you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
So any questions about what CCL does? I have a question if nobody else does. Given the political climate that we have and the really partisan divide that the country is going through and has for the last decade, it's been getting worse. How do you maintain bipartisanship or nonpartisanship?
Well, as I said, I think it's pretty hard. And it would be interesting for others, I think, to read this conversation that's going on between or among group leaders as they talk about what it means to them. So it can be hard, but I think what one of the group leaders from Chicago, who's also a state coordinator, has said that he thinks about what it would be like if he were a member of Congress. Would he want to have people targeting him in one way or another for legislation that he's taking or positions that he's taking? We want to be able to meet with these members of Congress. And so we try to stay involved in the policy and not in the politics. In fact, it's illegal to talk about the political races during a lobby meeting. And Jesselyn has asked the question, what's my favorite thing that CCL's done? I think one of the favorite things for me locally is that we honored Fred Upton when he retired from Congress. And one of the reasons I wanted to do that is to show that we are a nonpartisan group, that even though most of our members may be not conservative, I don't know, we don't always talk about that. We're not supposed to be talking about that at our meetings. We welcome anybody who's concerned about climate change. And so to be able to honor Fred Upton, and I think he really felt honored by us. We wanted to do it before he retired, but his dad got sick and then died just as he was retiring from Congress. I thought that the fact that he served 36 years representing this area warranted some appreciation. And so we planted a tree in his honor and some native plants in his honor. We gave him a chance to speak. We gave him a bucket list of things we wanted him to do in his retirement. And the buckets were good for his grandchildren to play in the sand now that he had grandchildren. So that sort of thing. I think just accepting people as humans who have concerns that we can associate ourselves with, what we try to do. Tim?
Tim?
I wonder if we could say more about the monthly meetings of our chapter that occur on the second Saturday every month. What are they like?
Well, we try to make them available in the best possible way for the people who want to come to them. So we structure them in unusual ways, I think. Not every chapter would structure their meetings this way. We will start tomorrow at 12:30 with a light lunch. Deb and I haven't talked yet about it, and I haven't thought yet about what might be in that light lunch, but people can come at that time, and we're going to be meeting this month, tomorrow at the Friends Meeting House. So that's where we'll be meeting, in the lower level there with a light lunch. And as I said, some people come at 12:30 to chat and to have a meal, and then at 1 o'clock, we join the national call on Zoom. And so we will join the national call at 1 o'clock, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. And after that, at 2 o'clock, we'll have our chapter meeting. And some people may be joining the chapter meeting on Zoom too. So if you've gotten an agenda for the meeting, the agenda includes the link to the national call and the local call. And we talk about issues that are coming up. For example, one of the things that will be on the agenda for tomorrow's meeting is thinking about ways that we can increase youth involvement. There had been a chapter of CCL at Western's campus, and the people involved in leading that have become immersed in their doctoral research or have finished their degrees and graduated. And it would be possible for that group to reconvene. So I did mean CCL, I didn't mean KCCC, I meant CCL. There is a great school electrification project that we can talk about. We will probably, for the 3 months after this month, be meeting at the Ashtemo Public Library, Ashtemo branch of the Kalamazoo Public Library, and I talked to the librarian there about the possibility of our putting on a program for children about climate change, and she seemed very open to that. So, does that answer your question, Tim?
Yes, and I just wanted to be clear that you're talking about the May 11th meeting at the Friends Meeting House. Future meetings may be at other locations, as you pointed out.
By the way, we haven't mentioned that we table a lot. And we're trying to grow our community so that some of what you're hearing here with the more people we have, the more we would be able to do and to divide our time up into more efficiently. And so we table at the farmers market, we table at a number of different functions with KCCC and with CCL to try to build up activists, people who are interested. And thank you, Mary Ann.
Thank you, Nikki. And